Welcome to Citizens Forum. We're back after a few months off, and there's a lot of things have happened in the last few months that we want to catch up on. I have with me today Mazen Al Nahawi, who is also proposing a new program for Shaw called Indigenous Voice. And Mazen's going to be here with me to make comments on a few things that are happening around the region and nationally. So welcome, Mazen. And why don't you just give us a brief overview of what Indigenous Voice is about and what you're hoping to achieve with it?
First of all, thanks, Walter, for having me on the show. As the name indicates, it's one voice for one indigenous people. The process of if you go around the world and you hear about how the process of colonization, you find out that it's the same story, but now in different geography. So the same issue is going on everywhere. Like when indigenous people in Australia, for example, facing some issues will be so similar to the indigenous people here. But the problem is that all these indigenous community are isolated from each other, in spite of they are dealing with one system, kind of mainly rushing for resource minerals and just to make a profit. So for one of the issue for me here living on this land, I realize with the time that I am completely ignorant of the indigenous history on this land, ignorant of their perspective. I'm familiar with it in general because again, I came from Palestine originally, and we have similar kind of process happening there. We face the colonial settler system kind of where expelled the indigenous for the foreigner to come and establish their society on the top of the indigenous society. So I know about that in general, but it's kind of a shame that I don't know the name of the real territory where I'm living in.
Yeah.
So and as you remember, thanks for Jack Etkin, and during our many talks about Palestine issue, I found out in the end it seemed like to understand the indigenous question here, this is the right things to do for me, even as a Palestinian. The issue there, it's not supposed to be any more a priority for me as much as the priority for where I live and the struggle with the people I'm living in their community.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned. I myself, even though I feel I'm sympathetic with a lot of issues with Indigenous people in Canada, I do not feel that connection that I wish I had. And perhaps this type of program can start some of these conversations that could help fill that gap, let's say. And of course, as you pointed out, as the people talk to each other and they start to compare what's happened to them and what's happened to in other countries, they see the similarities. So good luck with that show, Mazen. I really think it's a great idea.
And actually, we pointed out to Shaw TV that this is the kind of show it's not around, and they approved the show, and it's very nice to start to talk about this perspective and bring it out, and we need all to learn, and especially its history is always part of our present. As you hear lately about reconciliation process, I don't know how we can do to a process called reconciliation without first real acknowledgement. I don't see people agree or know exactly what happened to the indigenous people here. And after that process, then we go to a process I call justice. They need to compensate these victims. You cannot impose on them reconciliation like imposed on them before treaties.
Exactly.
So the process, it's very long. And one of the latest example we hear about, and this is also related to the news, about the water system. The Liberal government tried to put now about $4 billion in a certain amount of time and how that CBC finished the segment to upgrade the indigenous or the native community system to the national system. that already tell you that we have two systems here. One, in spite of the indigenous or the native community, it's not that big around, but they need $4 billion to match. That's how you tell you how it's deteriorating and how it's ignored. And
How
not only
poor,
about
how
water.
poor their water quality must have been, and this was a decision that was made by our government. It wasn't by accident. So, lots to cover there, you know, and so much to learn. It's really pretty exciting that you're going to embark on that journey, and I'm really looking forward to seeing these programs and see what transpires. So we have a few other topics that we always like to touch on this show, and because we do watch what's happening around the world, and there are a number of issues that impact us, and local issues too. One that comes to mind is the American elections for the President of the United States. And we're looking at the primary process that's going on there right now, particularly the Democratic process, who has been fraught with difficulties, and there have been lots of charges of unfairness and downright fraud in some cases with how the counting of the votes has gone in some of these primaries. Bernie Sanders, as we all know, is surging in the polls and surging in popularity in the United States. His message is very, very powerful, very hopeful. He's a totally different candidate than what we've ever seen before, although I know you don't see a lot of difference. I see more than a nuance here. Bernie's really talking about some serious issues of trying to democratize the United States and create a free and fair society. Now, what's happened very recently, and I think we just have to bring up with the voters that the California primaries just occurred last week, and there has been a lot of reports of voter suppression and actual voter fraud in the form of ballots not being counted. It's hard to get down to the hard numbers because you go online, but there is a lawsuit that's being developed that's going to bring this to the courts and to iron it out. But as it stands right now, according to Bernie Sanders supporters, he won California in a landslide, and that victory was stolen from them by the Clinton regime. So that's a story we're going to be following in the next several months up to this election. And this is an era that we've never seen quite in American politics, when the injustices have been so blatant, and the mainstream media not seemingly willing to cover it.
In spite of all the odds, Clinton still managed to keep going up. You have a from Benghazi scandal here. I mean, her term on foreign, the ministry, what they call it in the United States,
She's
the
Attorney
Secretary
General?
of State, Secretary
Secretary of
John
State,
Kerry.
that's right, yeah.
It was a disastrous. The email scandals.
Yeah.
You think each one of these will knock her down, and especially when you see on the other side, Bernie Sanders bring a very popular position about the connection with the big banks, they are the big friend of Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
New liberal policy, which is her husband implemented everywhere. So still, she managed to keep going up, and Bernie Sanders and Trump, in spite of the irony, opposite side from each other, they bring a popular opinion, I think.
Yeah, it's strange that you could say that Bernie and Sanders and Donald Trump have similarities, but if you actually look at them, they're anti-establishment candidates. The public is so tired of them. Now, we're going to cover this a lot more in the next few months, and we're really going to dip into and try to get the facts on the case of how, if there's been injustices done in this California primary.
But coming back to history, there is one thing, and just a short statement. Whenever who is the president in the White House, the American policy are always consistent.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we should take it seriously about who is, and always usually to cover up on the major issue they have. So the last election we have Obama and the big hope and change he's talking
Yeah.
about, but in the end, I believe he was worse than George Bush. At least he took away that arrogance and the stupidity of the American policy. He brought back the era of Henry Kissinger to go and manipulate government around the world by coups or CIA involvement. And the first victim was at that time, but people don't remember usually, Honduras president,
Yeah.
and Haiti later, who Mr. Obama sent them Mr. Clinton and George Bush, the most worst two people ever for the Haitian people. Obama when the earthquake
Exactly.
happened. So you can see,
The powers that be in the United States, no doubt. I mean, there's a control that's going on there that's overwhelming, and it's reflected in the media, particularly, and the media ownership, of course, is a big concern there. But I think there's always hope, Mads, and this is what I'm always saying is that, there's
hope so.
always a chance to make something better. I think Bernie Sanders is a breath of fresh air in that department, and we'll just see what happens in the next few months.
It's always good in the end. I mean, any improvement for the people's economic situations in the end is good. I mean,
Yeah, and hopefully Bernie will stick in there until the convention, and then he can probably get some of his views better heard. Now, some of the other stories we're going to be covering in the next few months is, of course, the mass shooting in Orlando that happened just a few days ago, and the troubling aspects of the reporting on that, and also the facts of the case where you have a Muslim perpetrator, so-called, and we have a very, very quick conversion to Islamic fundamentalism and the supporting of ISIS that wasn't consistent with his regular life. We see a history of perhaps mental illness. We see a lot of things that we've seen in other cases in the San Bernardino shootings, as well as the Boston bombings, and even here in British Columbia with the Nuttall and Crowley case.
Yes, but just there's one small example give you what is reality and how media represent that reality. After 9/11, there's around like until 2015, until San Bernardino incident, there was around 400,000 deaths in the United States because of violence.
Yeah.
Shooting, guns, because of violence, 400,000 people died during that time.
Yeah.
Only 40, I'm not saying 40 people, it's little number, but when you have 40 people died and the majority of them were by, if you remember, the Dr. Hassan who went inside the military station and shot, I think he shot like a big number. That is the majority of them. But in the end, you have the media represent the Muslim issue as is the issue.
Yeah, there's some troubling trends that we should plow over. So we're going to wrap up this segment. I just want to say that we're always looking for ideas for the show. And if you have any ideas that you'd like to send in, you can send it to walter@citizensforum.ca. And we'd happily take that information and perhaps use it on the show. And also, Citizens Forum is always looking for volunteers to help us complete this production. And if you're interested in getting involved in any way whatsoever, please get a hold of us. Thanks a lot, and stay tuned. So welcome back to the second segment of Citizens Forum. And today we have with us Alan Castles. He's a drug researcher, centered at the University of Victoria. He has written an article that's called Concocted War on the Drug Industry, Another Wag the Dog Scenario in Common Ground in June of 2016, just published. And basically the byline says BC Liberals can't afford a real war against pharma, so they'll fake one. So Alan, I know you wrote this article in Common Ground, and it's just out right now, and I really think it's pertinent to a lot of things that's happening in British Columbia right now with this government. And basically, maybe you could just walk us through how governments decide what drugs are going to be covered.
Yeah, part of the reason why this article is very pertinent is that the Liberal government brought in a new policy in the last 2 weeks that affects how they're going to pay for drugs.
Yeah.
And the NDP in the mid-90s did a very similar policy called reference-based pricing. It's very controversial. It really brought down the heavy guns from the pharmaceutical industry. It was basically attacking the government. And it was a policy that was essentially said, if you've got drugs in a basket of treatments that are equally effective, you would pay for the cheapest one first with public money, right?
Yeah.
And if that drug doesn't work for a particular person, they can apply to have the government cover another one. So it was a way to sort of keep a lid on the growth of the drug budget.
Yeah.
Again, very controversial. The pharmaceutical industry hated reference-based pricing. They attacked the government, the NDP government.
But it did save money, didn't it?
It saved a lot of money, and this is back when the provincial drug budget was about $400 million. It saved about 10 to say maybe 12% off that budget without any effect on
so
patients.
40, 50 million bucks a year.
Yeah, exactly. And that's money that would be pharmaceutical industry profits. So of course, the drug companies were really upset and they attacked the government. So fast forward 20 years later, you've got a Liberal government that everyone agrees is way too cozy with the pharmaceutical industry. They've brought in a number of policies that have really shown how they're kind of bending over backwards to make sure that the companies are going to continue to maintain their profits. And critics like myself and other researchers have looked at this and said, this is a very unhealthy kind of relationship between the government.
Yeah, and we've seen lots of, I don't know if you mentioned this in the article, there's lots of instances of you did actually talk about funding.
Yes.
And how the relationships seem to be there.
Well, if the pharmaceutical industry is kicking in, several $100,000 per election campaign to one party and not the other party, you would think that they would expect some payback.
Yeah.
And so this recent Liberal policy that came in, we suspect, when I say we, I'm not the only one that has sort of observed this, we suspect that this is the concoction of a phony war.
Yeah.
So they want to demonstrate to the public that they are hard against, they're standing up tough to the pharmaceutical companies. They don't want to be seen as that they're in the pockets of the drug companies. And so they'll bring out this mild policy, which will, look like you're playing tough.
Yeah, do you think this is stemming from, in the past with the scandal that firing the healthcare workers and all that, and a lot came out during that time that did indicate that there was a very close relationship between the pharmaceutical companies and the government.
We do know when you look at, say, lobbyist registries and see who is actually going into the Parliament, to the BC legislature, meeting with the health minister and the other advanced education minister, so on, you see a lot of presence of Pfizer, Novartis, the big drug companies that are going there and making sure that their drugs are front and center and that the politicians are aware of them. As a researcher, I think that's a very unhealthy perspective. I think you should be making drug policy decisions based on good evidence, good research, not on who shows up to lobby you and who shows up giving you political donations.
By the way, what other provinces have this sort of agency that looks at drugs and tries to find equivalents and all that?
Well, I mean, every province has an agency that does some level of assessment of the evidence.
Yeah.
The difference in BC that we had under the previous government was that there was a firewall between the agency and the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
They did not allow themselves to be lobbied. They did not allow the pharmaceutical companies to come in and do any schmoozing.
Yeah.
And so without that, you get good, clean, clear information about
For
drugs.
instance, I was going to ask you one more question around how this sort of works, because that's always interesting how they make these decisions. Now, during that controversy, there was a lot being said about these smoking cessation drugs that the drug companies were wanting to sell. And was it that same agency finding that maybe some of those drugs weren't effective?
Well, we couldn't find that out because the people that were studying those particular drugs, the smoking cessation drugs, they were fired in the big firing scandal in 2012. So, just put it this way, researchers that were going to possibly discover safety problems with drugs which the Premier has announced are wonderful and are going to be paid for by the government, those researchers are fired and that research never continues. So we don't know we essentially have not added to the safety picture of those drugs.
So that research was never started again.
No.
Even though they mostly have all been reinstated, haven't they? Don't they have pretty well back to square one?
Except for the guy that committed suicide. Which is unfortunate. And he was actually working on the smoking cessation treatment. And one of the ironies of the whole thing is that was actually one of the potential dangers of this drug, is that increased risk of psychiatric effects, including suicides.
So, that's a very interesting case and a very sad, very, very sad situation where a researcher was just so near getting his PhD, and once he lost his job, he never completed his PhD.
That's right. And so that was obviously tragic.
Yeah.
But the tragedy continues in the fact the government did not, renew the research that they originally thought was important. And that was one of several research studies colleagues of mine were working on. It fit a pattern of this sort of scandalous relationship between the government and the pharmaceutical industry. And again, that's why I wrote the article this month, is that they realize that they're facing the electorate next year. They have to do something to whitewash their reputation, because it's starting to get known in the community, certainly in the research world, that they're way too cozy to the drug companies.
Well, I think that's happening worldwide. And I always think, too, that even though we're a little British Columbia in Canada and, not a huge market like you'd have in the States or in Europe, but when you get decisions made about people who are screening drugs and they start pointing to a certain drug and saying, maybe that's not that good, and we don't want to cover it perhaps under our healthcare system, that other jurisdictions are going to look at that and go, wow, maybe they have something there.
See that is part of the problem. If you've got a province that has a very hard line and a very evidence-based approach to drug coverage, the other provinces are going to go, why can't we do things like BC? And in fact, we had under the leadership of the Therapeutics Initiative, this group at UBC, this independently funded group that was doing these kinds of drug assessments.
Yeah.
Well, certainly under this government, they've continued to lose their influence and their funding. Yeah.
So that's
again, that's fitting the pattern of let's play nice with the drug companies. There are partners. And you can read whatever you want into that, but I don't think you really want to partner with companies that have known criminal records. And I don't say that lightly. The major pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer, Novartis, GlaxoSmithKline, they've all had criminal charges and criminal and civil charges against them in the U.S., paid fines of several $1 billion for off-label marketing of drugs, for illegal promotion, and so on. And
so off-label, you mean using a drug that might have been for one thing,
that's right,
now being used for something else.
So this drug is for smoking cessation. Well, we're going to market it as an antidepressant, for example,
or weight loss,
pill. So they do this, and that's illegal, and the companies have faced fairly significant criminal fines. A colleague of mine in Denmark wrote a book a few years ago called Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime, talking about really the connections or the similarities between the major pharmaceutical companies and the mafia, in terms of the way they operate and the kind of way that they're able to sort of control their markets.
Well, they have the budget for huge public relations enterprises, and obviously they exercise their abilities because that they want to sell products.
Sure.
And you sort of say, well, isn't that awful? But we have a government on the other hand. And they're supposed to go to bat for us. That's what last time I checked.
Yes.
And this is what I'm finding, is that so many times on so many issues, it could be with mining or logging or healthcare, and you go right down the line. Every time you see all these things piling up, these conflicts piling up, and you see you realize that your elected representatives really aren't there for you. And thank you for writing this article, because I think people have to be thinking a little bit outside the box, particularly when you're looking at mainstream media and how information's coming into us. And if we don't have these perspectives that show that we should be scrutinizing these arrangements a lot more carefully, and we're obviously not getting that information in our everyday newspaper or whatever.
Well, we're not. And at the end of the day, you and I and our mothers and fathers and grandparents are taking drugs. We expect that the decisions that have been made to approve and cover those drugs have been made independently and unbiasedly.
Now I want to ask you, you brought a book today, and I know it's called the Cochrane Collaboration, and just tell us who the Cochrane Group is.
So the Cochrane Collaboration is probably one of the best independent sources of drug and medical information in the world. It's largely a volunteer organization where they do critical assessments of trials, of research around drugs and other treatments, and try to synthesize that so that you get the pure stuff. You know, one of the founders of the Cochrane Collaboration, I interviewed over 160 people to write this book. One of the founders said to me that clean, clear health information is as important as clean, clear water. And the Cochrane Collaboration is about distilling health information so it is pure.
Right now, who do these guys work for? How do they make their living?
The collaboration, they're mostly funded by governments. The UK government, the Canadian government, the government grants and so on. And like I say, largely volunteers that are doing this work.
Now in that book, do you actually talk about specific drugs?
So, you know, specific, what they specialize in is doing what's called meta-analysis. If you want to know whether a drug works, you don't look at this trial and that trial and this trial. You take all the trials, you put them together. There is fairly complex algorithms that you can crunch the numbers, and you get a definitive idea of whether the drug works better than, say, placebo or not. And that's what the Cochrane Collaboration specializes in.
So that could be one of the reasons to read that book. I mean, just for that. And I understand the politics, I think, is that we all have to be hip to the scene when making a decision, especially with drugs. And there's so many people die every year. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands. You might know the number, but that die from the wrong prescriptions, taking the wrong drug at the wrong time, and all that.
And drugs interact with each other, and people often will get too high a dose, or you know, they'll be taking too many drugs, or they'll get drugs for side effects of other drugs they're taking. You're right. It's some researchers, colleagues of mine, have said that adverse drug reactions is about somewhere between the 4th and 5th leading cause of death.
Wow, that's really, really significant. So Alan, thank you so much for coming by. It's always so interesting to talk to you, and I know in the future we want to have you back and see how things are going with this government.
There's lots to talk about.
It's really, really appreciated. So that's it for this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back to segment 3 of Citizens Forum. And we have with us today my good buddy Rick Hapgood, and I've known Rick for many years, and Rick's always been very concerned about issues around democracy, and Rick's done a lot of great work with an organization called Fair Vote Canada. And why we have Rick here today is because we got to start this conversation, which is going to go on for the next year or more, and that is what sort of electoral system we want here in Canada. So the first question, Rick, to you is, we get the first past the post right now. We've had it for 100 years. Why do you think we should be changing to another electoral system, and do you think it will be fairer for the public with better representation at the other end?
Well, I think what our goal is, and I think that what every democracy's goal should be, is fair representation. That means that you're represented, I'm represented, everyone is represented. In our democracy, with first past the post, a little less than 50% of the voting public is represented. So consequently, the reason why we want to change is this. When you go into the voting booth under our system, and you check, let's just say you check Liberal, but the NDP winds up winning the election. What happens to the Liberal vote?
It's just gone.
Where's it go?
Yeah, there's no representation for that
And
person.
what happens to that person who voted Liberal?
Yeah,
Is he represented?
yeah,
He goes back to the hockey game. That's what he does.
yeah,
And so what we're saying is that that's unfair. That's totally and completely unfair. That person that voted Liberal, that person that voted NDP, Green, Communist, or whatever the case may be, should be represented in Ottawa.
That's very interesting, and I think it really. We just had a brief conversation before the show, and where you said, if you look at how electoral systems work and how they affect society in which they're in, and I could immediately see from what you just said there that exactly the guy's been disenfranchised, the guy or the gal's been disenfranchised, they have no representation, they say, oh, what the hell, it's just the way it's going to go, and they just lose interest. But if they had a skin in the game and they did have some representation, then they would stay more engaged, perhaps.
Right. And that's what we want. That's what Fair Vote Canada wants. That's what thousands and thousands and thousands of people right across Canada want.
Yeah.
You know, this system, the first past the post system, was devised back in 1270 AD. 1270 AD. Edward I, who is one of Great Britain's leading monarchs, he's hugely popular.
Yeah.
And after reading a bit about the guy, I can understand why. Really tall, really big, very smart, really commanding. You did what you were told, or you had your head cut off. You know, like he was that kind of guy, right? So he famously said, he was the first one. He said, I control my council, which is Parliament way back then. I control my council, and I control my country. He didn't say, I control the country. I control my country. But he realized that in order to control his country, he had to first control the council or Parliament. So isn't that the game we play? So what they devised was way back then, a two-party system. It was just the lords and the commoners, right? That was it. So you had, and in a two-party system, okay, whoever gets the most vote wins the race, right?
Right.
And that's what it was. It was a horse race. However many goals get scored wins the game.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what first past the post is. It's exactly that.
Yeah.
So it's a blood sport. Okay?
Yeah.
It's like you knock them down, you mock them, you swear at them, you show what a bunch of lousy people they are with no morals whatsoever, and you just keep on hammering and hammering and hammering at it, get down and dirty, and that's what first past the post is all about. Because all you got to do is go into Parliament or watch and that's what they do. They scream at each other. If you go into a Parliament that has got a PR Parliament, it's subdued.
Yeah.
There's none of this punching. There's no name calling. You go to, like for example, if you want to see how a PR system works, go into the German website, the German government website, and you can go right to their Bundestag, which is their parliament,
Yeah.
and watch it. It's boring.
Oh, yeah. Wonderfully
boring.
boring. Yeah.
You know, here Merkel, Chancellor Merkel was up reading the financial reports for Germany, and it's boring.
Yeah.
And you know, but everybody's sitting there very attentively listening to her, and when it's all over, she just quietly sits down.
Yeah.
And that's what a PR democracy is all about, coalition.
Yeah.
And you have to work in coalition.
Yeah.
First past the post, it's all a matter of seats. So what happens, as we were just saying, in a riding, the Liberals win, everybody else's votes gets trashed into the waste
Okay,
paper.
so how does this going to work? Like, give me a simple proportional representation system that, that we can understand. How does that work just in the numbers?
It's really simple. Proportional representation can be extremely complicated. And there's different types of proportional representation systems, okay? So it will depend, but basically, proportional representation goes like this. If you get 40% of the votes, okay? If you get 40% of the votes, you get 40% of the seats.
And this is you meaning if your political party gets 40% of the votes?
That's right, the party.
Yeah.
Depends on the system.
Yeah.
But there's different systems of proportional representation. There's a list there's a list system where you don't elect parties, you elect people. And that gets a little complicated, and it's not as efficient.
Is that what's called a preferential ballot, or is that something else again?
No. Preferential ballot is a whole totally different animal.
Yeah.
That's an AV. That's just the one that Trudeau likes.
Yeah.
And if he goes with an AV system, then we will have a Liberal government in perpetuity, forever, forever. Because if people vote Conservative, they're not going to vote Green or NDP because they're not thinking on that level.
Yeah.
So their second choice is going to be Liberal.
Yeah.
If you vote Green, and you might vote NDP,
right,
but you probably will vote Liberal.
And they've already figured that out.
So as the numbers sort of get proportioned out, the Liberals will win the election.
Always the fallback,
always,
guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they'll always win. And of course, the Liberals love that.
Now the thing is about that is if the political parties had more, let's say, more checks and balances and controls in their processes for choosing candidates and for policy and everything, so that if those parties had more of a democratic arrangement, perhaps this system would work quite well.
Which one are you talking
about? The one you're discussing by using the political parties.
The
AV? No, like the system of proportionality. If you have 40% of these.
That's, you know what? That's in the. When I was in Berlin, I met a political scientist, and him and I had about a 3-hour talk. Fascinating. It was like I went through a whole year of political science in the 3 hours. There was so much. I'm still deciphering it. And he said to me, like in Germany, and I think Germany has like a really, really excellent model. I think their model is the best. Number one, their model, you will never get a Stephen Harper.
Yeah.
Ever. You will never get a Justin Trudeau. Ever.
Yeah.
You will never get any party getting that much power.
With a false majority, basically.
That's what it is. It's a total false majority.
Yeah.
So in the German model, you have to work in coalitions.
Yeah.
There's just no other way.
Yeah.
So there's always this counterbalance that happens within Germany, okay?
Yeah.
Always. And so what they do, in the German model, what they do is they say right from high school, they teach the students their electoral system.
Yeah.
And they say, this is what they say, we want you to get involved politically because this is very important.
Yeah.
You have to, in order to be a German citizen, a good German citizen,
it's
get
understood.
Involved politically.
Yeah.
And so eventually what happens is you find a party that you like. And throughout your life, things change, right?
Yeah.
But you find a party and you join that party. And when you join the party, people, what they do is they throw their name into a hat who want to be candidates, right?
Yeah.
Well, you learn who the people are and what they stand for, and then as a party member, you vote for them.
Yeah.
The person with the highest votes, right, is the first one that gets elected to the Bundestag.
Yeah.
And such and so forth all the way down the line.
Oh, okay.
That's how that works.
So you're not electing an individual. You're just the
You're electing a
voter.
party.
The general population just votes for a party.
That's the federal.
Yeah.
Now the other one is the regional.
Yeah.
So this is the German way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
If you get voted into a region, like a riding,
Yeah.
Murray Rankin, for example, okay, or Elizabeth May,
Yeah.
for example, okay. So Elizabeth May gets voted into her riding, which she does. Now, under the German model, that's would be her world.
Yeah.
Is that riding?
Yeah.
Okay. She wouldn't have anything to do with Newfoundland.
Yeah.
She wouldn't have anything to do with Manitoba.
Yeah.
She wouldn't have anything to do with Fort McMurray, anything
Yeah.
like that. Her whole career, her whole term
Focus,
is
yeah.
basically taking care of her riding.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. The Germans feel that that is the best way because
Yeah.
so they elect a person for the riding,
Yeah.
and that's it. The second one, there's two checks. There's one for the riding and one for the federal, which is the
Yeah.
party, right?
Yeah.
So the party, the second check, which is for the party, they're the people who take care of everything federally.
Right.
So they take care of health care, they take care of the military, they take care of education,
Yeah.
anything that is German-wide, right?
Right.
The Elizabeth May, for example, wouldn't really have that much to do with education, for example,
Right.
unless there's a problem within the riding.
Yeah.
And if there's a problem within the riding, then she will bring that issue up in the Bundestag. One last thing, the Green Party of Canada is presenting a electoral reform town hall meeting, all right? And that's between 7:30 and 9 o'clock on June the 16th, which is this Thursday, all right? And it's going to be at the Victoria Regional Library, Nellie McClung Branch, which is on Mackenzie and Cedar Hill Road.
Right.
And David Murner will be giving a presentation on proportional representation and how it works and how important it is. And also, Fair Vote Canada is going to be tabling at Victoria's Car Free Day on Douglas.
Okay.
And that's going to be between 11 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So anybody that wants a little bit more information or a lot of information about electoral reform can either go to the town hall meeting or they can catch us at the Car Free Day on this Sunday, the 19th of June.
That's fantastic. Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much. Appreciate that. Welcome back to segment 4 of Citizens Forum. And we have with us today John Farquharson, who does a show right here on Shaw called CRD in Context. And we plunked John over on the other chair today, and we're going to just pick his brains a little bit to try to give us an update on what's happening with this sewage treatment in Victoria and give us an idea of where you think it's heading now that we have some new developments. And basically, maybe we should just get into asking you, the provincial government now has stepped in. They've now appointed a board,
Right.
I believe. That's going to be a board of an expert panel that's going to
Right,
be
you-
working on the proposals.
You have to be careful with the word expert. First,
Expert panel. And they're going to come back to the CRD with their options, let's say. And then the CRD still is in the driver's seat, still able to make the decisions. Is that how it is?
well, on paper it is, because if you look at the terms of reference, they're about 8 pages. And as you go through the terms of reference, it's clear that the project panel has control for everything. They've even taken control, essentially they've taken control of zoning.
Yeah.
Because they were confronted on that, and the facilitator, Mr. Milburn, said, no, there are other legislative pieces that can more or less override local zoning.
So basically, if that panel
regulations.
comes to the CRD and says, okay, you're going to put this pipeline or whatever down this street, the CRD doesn't have to worry about it. They know that the province is just going to make it happen.
Well, if they say no, then as Director Helps, Mayor Lisa Helps of Victoria, has said, that if they say no, they're going to have to go back to the taxpayers and say we just lost $500 million in senior provincial and federal level funding, each
Right.
of them being in for about $250 million.
Yeah, so I just to touch on that, John, because I always wondered about how real this threat of losing this money was, number one. And number two, I always was concerned about the fact that the PPP Canada, who's holding the purse strings and deciding whether they're going to divvy this money out. And PPP Canada, I think, stands for Private-Public Partnership.
Public-private partnerships.
So, okay, let me ask you about the PPP thing first, just so I understand. What is that body? What relationship do they have with the federal government?
As far as I know, the federal funding was in three dollops, three pockets, came out of three different sources. And about 83 million came from 3P Canada, and it applied specifically, as I understand it, to Heartland, because that was where the biosolids processing was going to take place. And they had a deadline that was different from the other funding sources. So the original, we're going to lose the funding, only applied to the 83 million. But now the funding threat is for the whole enchilada, all $500 million.
Now, how could it be that this organization, how could they have the jurisdiction to actually make that decision? Was that their decision, or was it the Trudeau government made that decision? Who made that decision?
About
the funding, whether the funding's going to, we have a deadline. It's 500 some odd million.
I mean, how realistic is it? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, if you didn't meet the deadline, if you got started by, we're supposed to be, 2020, but if you had something rolling, you had shovels in the ground and you're halfway there by 2020 and you need another year or two, like what government's going to come in and start and pull the money and or begin to fine you because you're 2 years late?
So I'm just catching up on this issue because I'm trying to fit it in my brain cells, how this works.
You and a lot of other people.
And remember a couple of years ago, a bunch of bright people arrived on the scene and start talking about putting in these small tertiary treatment plants, sprinkling them all over the region. They were all supposed to be very unobtrusive. Just you'd hardly tell whether they were in your neighborhood or not. A lot of them could be attached to pumping stations. They didn't cost a lot. You could bring them in on big semi trucks and set them up, kind of plug and play kind of things, and you'd get a tertiary treatment for that segment of the system. And over time, from what I understood, you could actually get most of the system treated to tertiary level. And it didn't cost that much, and it was very unobtrusive. What happened to that idea? Is it still there?
In theory, it's still on, it's still possible.
Yeah.
It'll be entirely up to the new project board to decide the fate of a distributed tertiary.
But the thing is so strange is because they're deciding on these locations of these big treatment plants that appear to be, are they secondary?
Well,
tertiary?
I guess they could be either in the sense of the one at McLaughlin was originally going to be a centralized secondary for the whole region. Yeah. And then apparently at the last minute, I think it was Director Jensen went back and said, how much would it cost to bump it up to tertiary level? And I forget it was an extra, I forget how much the extra it was. But the thing about the distributed system is it really makes good use of the existing infrastructure. As you mentioned, some of it's located on existing pump stations. And so when you take it, for example, if you took advantage of Clover Point, then you've got an existing outfall, and you don't have to, dig up Cook Street and across Bay Street.
Well, even with these type of systems, I'm not an engineer, but it seems to me when you have a tertiary treatment, what comes out the other end, you could drain into a drainage system.
That's the biggest, I think, for me, the biggest advantage of tertiary is you can discharge into what they call inbound waters.
Yeah.
You don't have to pump it a kilometer out to sea.
And it can arrive at the ocean at its
or you can
own
distribute
pace.
it on the you can distribute it into like a wetland, an artificial wetland. So the options for getting rid of the tertiary treated water are much easier because, like you know, if you're close to the ocean, you can do it right there.
Okay, and are we supposed to take a lot of comfort now that they have this new expert panel, the provincial expert panel? I did glance at the names. I didn't see any biologists.
Did you see any experts in the sense of having an extensive background
This is it.
in the design and building of wastewater treatment and
Yeah.
resource recovery systems?
Yeah.
I looked at it and I didn't see anybody. You know, they have 4 people who came over, one elected representative from the CRD,
Yeah.
one director. They have the chief administrative officer from the CRD, and they have 2 people who were the chair and vice chair, respectively, I think,
Yeah.
of the Cntr Commission.
Okay, I'm going to tell you the rest of my concerns. I'm looking at the CRD, and I think we have to look at, we have to look at what the heck happened in the last 10 years. They've been talking about the sewage treatment. It's an ongoing saga. It's almost unbelievable where we are and how much money has been wasted.
65 million?
So, anybody from the outside that's not from here would come and say, well, what's going on here? How come nothing's moving here? And it seems to me that one of the problems is the governance structure of regional governance here in Victoria region. And you're looking at the CRD that really doesn't have, they can't really trump the municipalities in their decision making. Now, where I'm from in New Brunswick, I'm from Kings County, New Brunswick, a great old county, about 250 years old or something. But that government is a regional government. And when they want to put a road through the town,
They do it.
they just say, okay, guys, we're going to widen this road. This is a regional artery, blah, 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 it's done. And the same thing with all the other, policing and waste treatment and all these other things. They just made those decisions. There was never any controversy. We'd read it in the paper. Sometimes it would be, your regular politics. But there was always a way to access the system. It was understood what the parameters of the decisions were, and the public knew what their role was. But in this case, I don't know what my role is in this. I can't remember anybody running for election, and if the city councilors say, you elect me and I'm going to get this type of system built. I want this type of sewage treatment system built. I don't think anybody ran on those parameters. So how does the public feel that they can get engaged,
Well, I mean, they can get engaged, but as you point out, usually they get engaged when it comes down to what's going to or not going to go in their backyard.
Yeah.
And, pardon me, one of the, I think, good things is, as I said, this project board now has control of zoning. So you reference back to good old Kings County, New Brunswick.
Yeah.
They're going to have essentially the same power as the people you referred to back in New Brunswick, because they say they have legislative pieces that can more
But
or
don't
less.
you think that we shouldn't have just a structure like that in British Columbia? I'm surprised we don't have it. I'm sure other jurisdictions and other cities are suffering through the same problems making these decisions. What is holding back British Columbia, the government of British Columbia, to say, yeah, we're going to form this third level of government. It's well established worldwide. It seems to work for us. And then we'd have sewage treatment underneath in their jurisdiction. And all of a sudden, I think this would all become much more simpler, in my view.
Yeah. Well, I think that I recognize the fact that a wastewater treatment plant is it's a particular type of large facility,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Do you want one next door to you? No. Do you want a nuclear plant next door to you? No. So there's probably a handful of large developments that nobody wants anywhere near them. So yeah, so a New Brunswick County approach to making sure that those went through would be appropriate. But
Yeah.
in terms of the way that it's currently structured, it seems to work for, many of the projects that are put before it, but not on this one.
Okay, I got one more beef. I can get the arrow, all my criticisms. We went to some of these forums. I went to two actually, when they were talking about sewage treatment. And I came into those rooms, and when you started to really look at who was all there,
Which ones were these, though?
I went down to the one down at the museum in the big
Okay, yeah.
big room there, and there were so many either politicians that all had their interests
Oh, yeah.
in what they want to see happen, and then they had probably just as many public relations people there. schmoozing at every table. When we went to give our 2 cents worth of what we thought we should happen, the person wouldn't write down what I was telling them, and there was never any real criticism. Now, do you think that this new maneuver by the government, is this just another public relations ploy that they're using? Do they?
I think you'll have to wait to see what sort of communication begins to come out from the project board. As you point out, much of what went down as public engagement was nowhere close to public engagement, because basically what was coming out was propaganda. So you can't, as a citizen, you can't make an informed decision if you don't have the necessary information to make an informed decision.
Well, it's just confusing.
It's confusing, but it's extremely manipulative.
Oh, in the
As you
worst
said, you
sense.
sat there and said things, didn't get written down, and then when somebody said the right thing, they got written down. Yeah. That's manipulation.
And it's just as soon as you were talking outside these parameters that they were setting,
They don't wanna
maybe
hear you.
large treatment plants or whatever they're talking about, which seemed to me that's the only option that was being presented to me. You couldn't say, no, I think this is fundamentally wrong. I think we should go to these distributed tertiary treatment plants and all that. And the final question is, do you think we could ever get back, really seriously back to talking about these small treatment plants, or is that just something that's gone by now?
I don't think it's gone by. I mean, in theory, technically, it's still out there. You may only end up with 2, right?
Yeah.
Or 3. You may
Yeah.
end up with a smaller number of tertiary treatment plants. But tertiary on a distributed basis is, I think, still on the table.
Well, how about even getting into these smaller plants that they were talking about that were back well into the system, that weren't even supplying these major centers for treatment? Do you think we can ever get back to that idea?
Well, that was floated, I think, as the right plan, RITE, and it was the brainchild of Mayor Atwell, of Saanich, Director Atwell. And it basically came down to about 8 small facilities distributed around the region. And the plants would vary in size in accordance with what land was available around the site. So you'd have a larger one at Clover as opposed to Macaulay, because Macaulay's a restricted site, and so on.
Well, look, you cleared some of this stuff up. You got all that other work to do in your own show. I'm sure you can further clarifications, and congratulations on your show. It's very interesting to watch, and I love you interviewing your guests. And I just want to thank everybody for watching, and that's it for Citizens Forum for this week, and we'll see you next week.